Marketer of the Day, number 474. Moments of Adversity. Take risks, be relatable, and adopt a growth mindset with Dr. James Kelley. Hey everyone, we're so glad that you're listening to the show. You caught us in the middle of talking to Dr. James Kelley, and you can find him at drjameskelley.com, and that's Kelley. And Dr. James Kelley has a book called The Crucible's Gift, 5 Lessons from Authentic Leaders Who Thrive in Adversity. And that book unpacks the journey a leader takes to become more authentic, starting with their crucible. I'm sure we're going to talk about that and all kinds of other fun subjects. So how are things today, Dr. James?
Things are fantastic. And thank you so much, Robert, for having me on your show.
Yeah, I mean, you got it. We're both, it sounds like we're both sort of consistent podcasters, and we have a lot of fun, a lot of things in common. So I'm really curious to find out about what makes you different and special, what makes you stand out. So what the heck is it?
I think the first person you have to ask is either my wife, then the second would be my 4 kids. For me, I don't know. I think my journey is what makes me unique. You know, in doing some research on you, it looks like you kind of lived in the same little general area in California, which is totally fine, right? Everyone has their story. Many people in the U.S. don't travel much. For me, I always had this sense of curiosity of how other things worked, how other people thought, how other cultures behaved. And so, you know, since my late 20s, essentially, I've lived in Japan. I've spent 4 years in Australia. I've lived in Chicago, San Jose, New York, where else? Portland, Oregon. And now I'm just outside Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And I've been here going on 2 years now. And we'll probably be here another year or two before I head back to the States.
I love it. So you're always on the go. You're always checking out the new frontier, challenging yourself, not staying in the same place. And I'm not sure what the exact statistic is, but I think I read something once where like the average person, they're born in one location and then they usually move about 20 miles and that's it. And that's
correct.
Freaking terrifying.
Yeah. I think there's also something about the other side of it, right? So the grass is always greener. And so for me and my wife was a military brat. We are really great at making friends when we move, but we're really shockingly bad at keeping them when we leave, because you just know it's really great people in a transactional or transient moment. And, you know, I have friends and she has friends who've lived in the same area all their life. They have really deep, meaningful relationships with their family members, with their friends. And so our kids actually miss out a lot on that side of it. You know, we see her family once every 2 years, my mom every 2 years. It's not the best for creating an extended family in terms of cohesion. Internally, living abroad is fantastic for your family because you're really forced to hang out with each other all the time and get to know each other all the time. And, you know, our kids, my oldest is going to be 10 this year, and the youngest is going to be 3. They're all really close because they're forced to play with each other all the time. So it has its plus and minuses, but for me, it's always been about the journey, right? So we don't know what we don't know, and that is such as life. And when you start to realize when you travel that there are other things, like in Australia, the hood of a car is called the bonnet and the trunk is called the boot. And you speak the exact same English language, except you have no idea what they're saying. So you actually still have to learn another language. So it's all these type of things that really get me going to constantly want to learn. And now, more specifically, and I'm sorry, it's a very long-winded answer.
That's okay.
More specifically, you know, my kids, I believe, and again, there's 2 sides to every coin. I believe I'm giving my kids an amazing gift about living in a Muslim culture that doesn't fit the stereotypes that they may have perceived or have received if we stayed in the States. Just by sheer volume. I mean, in my son and daughter's school, for example, they've got Emiratis, Jordanians, Palestinians, British, Irish, South Africans. And, you know, that's difficult to replicate in the U.S. unless you're in Manhattan or Chicago or something like that.
Okay, so basically, yeah. So there's lots of cool stuff about that, like just that outside of your family, it's hard to make those friends, but the family gets really close together, and just in general, that travel expands the mind, and I can definitely relate. Like you said, I've always lived in California. I moved around a little bit, but I have traveled to. I was in Australia for one day actually, and that was cool to see like the blend of. It seemed like it was like part American, part British, and then there was a little bit of like a Asian, like kind of a Japanese influence in there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And Japan, I flew through there a couple times on the way to Thailand, and that was so just everything was different there. Like the signs were in complete
Yeah.
sentences. I didn't know how to open a door or flush the toilet, or like everything was literally
Oh my God.
you
Yeah,
know
yeah.
different in there. And yeah, and I haven't, just in all my traveling, I haven't found a place I'd want to live other than California. Like some stuff was too weird, or I wouldn't want to live in the snow and things like that, but it was still good to see if something grabbed me. And I can definitely relate, I mean, not to your extent for sure, but to some extent, at how just getting outside of your comfort zone and getting outside your usual cultures, it makes you think completely differently. And I mean, everyone should do it at least a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that in America, the younger generation, oh my God, do I ever sound old as shit right now? The generation coming up, the college students, so many universities are almost requiring their students to go study abroad. They're basically saying you need to get out of this campus, this city, and you need to go see how something else works. And the amount of, I'm a professor by day, and so the amount of students that have gone abroad and have come back and who have told me that their world has drastically changed. Their perception, their opinion, their mores and philosophy. I mean, it's amazing what can happen when you are forced to be uncomfortable in a situation. And that level of uncomfortability for all of us, whether we are marketers, CMOs, CEOs, or even line managers, that sense of being uncomfortable is actually the best moment in your life. Never in the moment, always after the moment, but they are the essential parts of who you are in terms of growth.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And when you say that, it makes me think of things like high school or college, when like you'd go to a party, and if you didn't know anybody, sometimes you'd leave or you wouldn't stay long. You'd kind of just stay to yourself. And I can completely relate to that. And that those times when when you're not sure what to do, you take a risk, you have to take some action. That's where growth happens. But we definitely don't get that lesson as we're going through it.
No, never. That usually when you're going through it, you're freaking out. Like you're like, what is happening? Like the party one's a great example. I mean, so many people. It's just like the most uncomfortable thing, right? To go to a party, not know anyone, feel like you should be there because, well, you need to make friends, but making the friends is the hard. I mean, it's just the most uncomfortable. Like for most people, that's the most uncomfortable thing ever, is the going to a business meeting, not knowing anybody there. I hate it. I feel like it's one of the most pressure-packed situations because you're putting yourself on display for full judgment. Whether people are supposed to judge you or not, we all tend to judge regardless. And I say that knowing that in my book I try to talk about not judging, but we're human beings first and foremost.
So, I mean, yeah, so speaking of your book, I mean, do you have any solutions for these sorts of things? Because I'm sure that if we could find a way to break out of our shells and to kind of be out there more, whether that means, getting a new joint venture contact, or being on someone else's podcast, or joining a new club, or, talking to, like, calling someone on the phone. I'm sure that there are lots of ways that we can push ourselves for the better. So, I mean, how do we get over this just tendency to shrivel up and be nervous?
Yeah, well, I think that so that's a great question, and I think it's all context specific. And so when you think about the context of when you're most vulnerable, it's typically when you are in the position of least power. And so, in the book, I talk about this concept called relatableness. Now, it's not a real word. Maybe someday, but right now it's not a real word. It's a derivative of relatable and related. And the idea of it is that there are leaders out there who have this uncanny ability to meet people where they're at. Whether you are the janitor, the admin, the VP, they have this ability to meet you where you're at. And I call these micro moments of meaning. And what's great about that is that if you're somebody out there who is really uncomfortable, really scared, really nervous, there's a couple of things that you can do kind of off the cuff when you're in these situations to actually think of the other person first, which then will ease the conversation. And what I mean by that is one of the first things that I always do and I recommend to people is if I'm in a meeting one-on-one or in a group setting, I actually try to mirror a lot of the body language. And the mirroring of this body language, what it does is it assimilates the person to who you are because they're seeing themselves in you, if that makes sense. So if I'm sitting at a coffee shop and I'm talking to somebody, if they lean forward, I lean forward. If they lean back, I lean back. If they cross their arms, I cross my arms. And so I mirror what they do, especially when I'm trying to build rapport, because rapport is built in the first probably, I don't know, 1 to 3 minutes. Someone's going to get a feel for you, and if you have something in common. So if you can alleviate one of those barriers by mirroring their behavior in terms of their physical behavior, then this is a really powerful tool. The other thing I do is if I'm in a group setting, for example, I tend to look at the stuff they have on. And I know that sounds a little bit maybe weird or creepy, but I'm trying to figure out something about them. I'm creating what I call a consumer map. A consumption map. And it's not about strategizing how much they make or what positions they have in life, but it's to kind of find some sort of topic with what they're wearing or how they're or a story they're telling, but some way to relate to them. So I'm either listening or looking at them, trying to decide where's the commonalities, because in commonality becomes the moment of connection. You know, with all the podcasts that you've done, I am sure there's a number of podcasts that stand out above and beyond all the rest that you've ever been on or have interviewed before. And it's because there were those moments straight off the top that you were like, I get this person. And it's something they said, it's a way they said it. It was a sense of humor or a joke. But it was in that moment that you probably, Robert, decided right then, like, I dig this person. I'm into him. And so for the general person, you know, the last thing to say about this, for the general person, it's not also only about trying to mirror them or trying to figure out what it is about them that you can connect with. It's also about yourself. And it's about your own personal fear and your own personal inhibition, or your own personal what's the word I'm looking for here? Reservedness, if you will, because you don't want to be judged. And so when we let fear conquer us, we're not allowing ourselves to conquer anything else. You know, there's a cheesy saying that I say to my kids all the time. I don't think it's worked yet, but I say it. I've been saying it since they've been babies. And we say it in the house all the time. We say, don't let fear conquer you, conquer fear. Because it's okay to be scared. It's what you do with that is what matters most.
That's pretty powerful, and I can relate to a lot of that, and especially the part about how like just knowing that the fear is temporary, and knowing that the fear is a thing happening to you. I mean, being aware of it isn't the whole battle, but it's quite a bit of it. And I'm connecting with you a lot as far as when I'm in a one-on-one situation or like a group situation, something in person, that first of all, at least when I like focus on the other person more, it takes a lot of the pressure off, because now I'm not worried so much about how perfect I have to be or do I have to say everything right. I'm asking them questions, I'm focusing on them, and then that way it's sort of like they're on the spot. And then as far as the mirroring goes, like that took me, and I'm still trying to get better at it, but I'm with the mirroring, it's kind of interesting when it took me a couple of years to look for it and to be aware of it. And like same thing, like if I'm folding my arms and they fold their arms, and after a while sometimes it kind of becomes like, almost a secondary layer of communication. Like we're talking,
Yeah.
but then
Yeah.
like sometimes they follow me, and then sometimes I follow them as far as like leaning back or I make sure now to like point my feet towards the person so that way they know I'm at full attention and things like that. And the mirroring at first seemed super weird, but until I got it explained to me the way that you explained it, where you're meeting them where they're at. And so like there's an Australian friend that I have, and I'll message him maybe once a month, and I'll make sure to call him mate. And I don't like go out of my way to say, okay, well I talked to that person to call him mate, but just when I talk to him, I sort of hear his voice, or I hear like what I imagine him saying back to me, and I kind of, Australians, they always say mate after almost every sentence. So when I message him, I'm like meeting him where I'm at, so that way the communication goes more smoothly. And it took me a while to overcome that hang up, because at first I was thinking, oh well, I'm like cheating, I'm manipulating them. But then as soon as I realized it was kind of meeting them halfway, it's like it makes them open up, makes them connect with you better.
And let me add to that, because I think there's another avenue of this. And as a podcast host, you know this, and as I just did, people love to talk. So if you give them the opportunity through the questions that you ask to explain, share, and you listen with intent, and that's really tough to do for a lot of people, right? We listen to talk. Most of us listen to talk. But if you actually listen compassionately with intent to listen, so much can happen in those moments. And, like I said, most people like to talk. So if you just ask them questions about themselves, and I think that we're in this culture right now, which I find so contradictory at times. You're not allowed to ask people too many personal questions because it's personal. However, most people post their whole entire life on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or wherever else. So I always love the direct contradiction of, hey, don't ask me too many personal questions. Just go to my Facebook page. I'll tell you everything you want to know. So you're like, well, wait a second. And so the other thing I would say, finally, is that we're talking a lot about basically neurolinguistics, right? Which is the behavior of body language, essentially, and words and the meanings behind them. And so, all of this really can help with the concept of being relatable and having a better micro moment of meaning, if you will.
Yeah, and so you're not just being like the average person who's kind of half listening or like playing on their phone or multitasking. You're actually having 100%.
That pisses me
focus.
off.
Yeah, I mean, me too. And or you say something and it's like, okay, that they weren't listening to me for the past 5 minutes. But and then since you brought up like the podcasting thing, something that another thing that took me like a long time to get over was just that especially with like the interview thing, like sometimes people kind of have their preset, I guess, length of answers. So sometimes I'll have a guest on and they'll give me like 1 minute, 2 minute answers. So I'll always have to be scrambling to move the conversation along. But then I'll have other guests who are like kind of more like you, where it's more on the 5 to 10 minute side of things. And I would say like when I on podcasts, I'm maybe like a 5 minute answer, maybe 5 to 7 minutes. So it's like at first I was frustrated because I was like, oh, this person, I have to like drag the conversation along, or with someone else, it's like, well, I can't even get a word in. But then once I realized that sort of relating to being around different people and different cultures and different personalities, it's like, okay, well, just different people are used to giving different lengths of answers. And once I did enough of those, and once I got used to handling each type, then it was a lot less of a hassle, as opposed to before thinking that the way that I was thinking had to be the way everyone else was thinking. Once I let go of that and realized that people are different, then it got a lot more of a smoother transaction in the podcasting.
You know what I started doing, because of what I just did to you like 3 times now and give a really long answer, is that I would say to the guests before they start, I said, listen, I may interrupt you in the middle of something you said, not that I'm trying to be rude, but I don't want to lose a really good question that might be in the middle of your awesome answer. So just please accept my apology up front that I'm just trying to move the conversation in certain directions. And sometimes certain interviewees that I have give really long answers, and I'm interested in certain parts of the answer, not all of it. And so I try to be very diplomatic about it. But I always, you're really nice. I always interrupt. I'm always like, oh, that's a good question there. Oh, let's go this way. Oh, wait, let's go this way. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but I try to be apologetic behind it at least.
Well, so I should probably focus more on interrupting or find a way of maybe
Yeah.
not being as concerned with pissing off the guest and maybe be diplomatic or set things up front. So maybe I can grab onto a juicy question if there's a
Yeah.
good one in there.
Well, totally. If you're setting the expectation up front, I've yet to have anyone be upset about it. Because when the way I always frame it, this is something I always talk about in the book as well, is that I frame the proposition from their perspective. And so I want them to be the best they can be on my show. And so I say to them, listen, I want this to be your best interview you've ever had. And to do that, I need to ask the questions that are really important. Sometimes that means cutting you off to get a deeper answer on something that you've said, or to move the conversation in a different direction because it might be more interesting for the audience, but it makes you look the best. And so I always frame almost everything I do, and I mean this genuinely, from their perspective. And I think that's sometimes really important to think that way.
Yeah, I agree, and this is all reminding me of like how to win friends and influence people type of thinking.
Oh, totally, totally, yeah,
look at
totally.
it from their point of view and try to do your best to understand them and help them, and so that way you're the person that's getting them where they need to go, as opposed to some kind of tug of war situation.
Yeah. A little Dale Carnegie doesn't hurt.
Yeah, never does. Well, great. Well, I want to make sure that before we wind things down and wrap things up, that people know about the real good stuff in this book. If we've left anything out, is there any other areas of the book that you want to make sure people are aware of today?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. So here's the thing. I'll give you the quick synopsis of the book because from everyone who's read the book, the reviewers right now, Marshall Goldsmith is reviewing it. I have an individual named Joe Burton, who was the former COO of Mechanics and World Group, writing the foreword of it. Everyone who's read the book says that this book is really important for one reason only, is that it brings to light everyone, because we all have it, the idea of a crucible. And the crucible are those moments of adversity that we have in our life. And there tends to be two sorts of people. There's the ones who let the crucible define them, and there are the other ones that define the crucible for themselves in a positive light. And what I found through my interviews, and I used a lot of them, all of them, for my podcast. And what I found is this theme with the leaders that I interviewed. And the leaders that were really thriving, that were either a driving entrepreneur, CEO, COO, whatever, they all had some sort of crazy crucible early on in their life. You know, it was amazing to me, the amount of people who had some sort of tragedy early on that gave them perspective about the greater world. It made them more compassionate about those around them. It made them have higher levels of integrity, of showing up to do the job, to be honest. It let them relate to people to where they're at, create those micro moments. And the other thing that really happened that I thought was just fascinating from this crucible is those that really own their crucible. Not only were they more self-aware, which is a huge positive outcome, but they also had what's called a growth mindset. And for the audience who doesn't know who Carol Dweck is, she wrote a book in 2006 called Mindset. And one of the premises of this whole entire book, or the main premise, is this idea of being a growth mindset type of person. So you accept failure, you praise those around you, you want to beat your failure up. You know, you want to look at it, pull it apart, you want to learn from it. And so they always are trying to grow and learn. And so this book really talks about this process of just, the themes that I saw from these leaders who were consistently outperforming others that I spoke with, and what it was about them that I derived from it. And everything I do, there's a little bit of research, but I don't write like an academic. It's very conversational. The interviewee's voice is in there, my voice is in there. So it's a great book, and there's always some, here's what you can do to be more self-aware, more compassionate, or have more integrity, things like that. And at the end of each chapter, and these were actually given to me by some friends of mine who are both two psychologists that are really well respected in their field as well. So really excited about the book.
Well, super awesome. Well, it sounds like a lot of stuff in there about how to be a better person in general. And you mentioned that idea of the crucible, and it made me think of like like a superhero origin story. Like, you look
Yeah.
at, Superman or Batman or the Flash or whoever. It's like Batman didn't just sort of slowly and gradually become Batman. He's
Yeah.
like, oh, parents are murdered. This tragedy happened. Have to take some action. So yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like, so it sounds like if we've had that adversity, those failures, those setbacks in our lives, like we all have, then it's not a matter of we should have avoided the setbacks. It's how do we then evolve and become a better person because of the struggles we've gone through.
Absolutely. I mean, so many people in the moment. I mean, I'll give you one story of myself that I put in the book as one, demonstrating one of my crucibles. And when I was 24, I had my first job. I opened an advertising office for a national company back in Portland, and I was grossly underqualified, but I did a fake it till you make it attitude in the interview. And I got a company car, and it was great. I mean, I'm 24. At the time, I was driving a brand new Honda Accord, and I was like, this is the bomb. Like, I was so excited. And so at the time, I was driving home, and I'd been out that night, and I had too much to drink. And I was drinking and driving. And so I come around this S-turn going, I think it was 70 and a 35. I was going pretty fast. I thought I was Mario Andretti or a race car driver. And I see this car just turn around, the lights come on. I'm like, oh, shit. And so I thought in my head that I could beat him to my house, get out of my car, and get in the house before he got to me. And so, long story short, I get a DUI. And in the DUI, when I'm in front of the judge basically says to me, all right, we're gonna sponge this from your record if you do court mandated substance abuse training. And so what does that look like? For the first 6 months, it was 3 hours a night, 3 nights a week. For the next 6 months, it was 3 hours a night, 1 night a week, and then it was a year of therapy after that with a psychologist. And the amount of people that probably would have gone into that to either try to get out of it or fight it is tremendous. It would have been easy to do. Like, I'm not an addict. I don't need to be here. This is a waste of my time, and blah, 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 like on and on and on. I took a different perspective on it, and I thought to myself, well, I'm a flawed human being, so I probably should try to learn from this. And so I spent the next 2 years just kind of learning about myself and the process and what addiction looks like and making some really great friends. And at the end, it wasn't that I was an addict. It's that I had a prefrontal cortex that wasn't developed yet, and I made really poor decisions. But I learned a lot about me, and I learned a lot. And that's just one of those choices. And I'm not better than anyone. I'm not. But the point I'm trying to make is that I could have easily blamed my life on that situation. I could have lost my job. I could have killed somebody. I could have been so much worse than what it was, right? And I didn't. So I think too often people use their crucible as a victim mentality and not an opportunity mentality. And those who use it as an opportunity, I'm telling you, grab those people, hold on to them, and learn from them when they get around you.
I love it. So these bad things that happen, and it's really tempting to double down or make things worse or make that the domino that leads to more and more bad things, or this bad thing that happened can be an unexpected opportunity to go in new directions and learn new things and turn it into a positive thing. So great stuff. And I want to make sure that everyone knows how to get the book, how to check out your podcast, wherever
Sure.
you want to send people. So give us some resources, give us some links here.
Yeah, sure. So basically over the next 4 months, if you first go to my website, so thank you for plugging that. So it's Dr. James Kelley. As any good marketer, I did buy the Kelley without the E, second E in there. So right now it's Dr. James Kelley.com. And just subscribe there. I have a video series coming out. I've got blog posts coming out about the book. So go subscribe to that. Also, you can subscribe to my podcast, Executives After Hours. It's on iTunes, Overcast, all of those, same as you. And drop me a note. And, one of the things I'm really looking for a project is I'd love for someone, I have it on my front page on my website, is to share with me your crucible. You don't have to leave your name. You don't have to tell me just what something you went through and how it transformed you. And I really want to share those on my show as kind of an opening over the next 4 months about how this transforms you and why it's so important to own it.
I love it. That's a really great concept and a really cool idea to open every episode with that. And so just to give people an idea, when they go to drjameskelley.com and they submit your crucible, about how long is this, or is that easy to tell when they go check it out?
I don't give a length. I say, you tell me the story you want to tell me. It's your story. So you can write a paragraph, you can write three, you can give me a sentence. That one's harder to talk about at the front of a podcast. So, but any of that, I think the most important thing is to share your story, how a crucible, a moment of adversity transformed you and how you led differently, right? That's the big thing is that it changed the way you dealt with people.
All
And you
right.
can just email me too. So at James at Dr. James Kelley.
All right, so multiple ways to get that to you. So
Yeah.
James at drjameskelley.com or drjameskelley.com directly. And then also make sure that everyone listening, you also make sure to not just listen, but subscribe as well to that bi-weekly podcast, Executives After Hours on iTunes. And we'll see you there. So Executive After Hours and drjameskelley.com. So thanks for stopping by the show, James, and for telling us about your what sounds like a pretty amazing life and about your takeaways and your lessons and your ideas and all these great things that we can all use. Even if maybe we've heard of some of these concepts before, we haven't always heard them in the right way. And I know that, at least speaking from my own experience, sometimes I need to hear or learn a lesson 10, 20, 30 times before it finally sticks. Or sometimes I'll learn a lesson and then forget it and make an old mistake again. So, as long as we're alive, it's always a struggle to up our game and be a better person. So I hope that everyone listening got a lot out of it. And if you did, which I'm sure you did, make sure to go to drjameskelley.com to check out more, and we'll see you there. So thanks for stopping by, James.
Thank you, Robert, for having me, and I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Please subscribe, rate, and review our show at marketeroftheday.com/iTunes and like us on Facebook at marketeroftheday.com/Facebook.